Welcome to episode 1 of Epitaph East Anglia, the podcast series from Norma Explores. As some of my existing followers will know, I had a podcast series last year where I was visiting graveyards and telling the stories of some of the headstones that I found. Life has brought me back to Norfolk, and I've not done the amount of travelling that I did last year, so I've decided to rein things in a little bit, and I'm going to re-release a couple of relevant episodes from the previous podcast, but we're concentrating now on East Anglia. It's my home area. I'm from Cambridgeshire originally. I now live close to Holt in Norfolk, where my business is situated. And it's a lot easier for me to get out into the East Anglian counties to do research on my few days off a week. So I've decided to rejig things a little bit. I no longer have Patreon, which is where my previous podcast was released from. So although I've got a handful of people who will have heard some of these stories before, hopefully these will be new to most of the people that find me now. If you don't already, please come and find me on Substack, where I will have accompanying articles, and most of my content now is uploaded to. I still have social media, obviously, but it's not as active as it was last year. So I'm going to concentrate on getting Substack articles written, this podcast written and recorded, and I am still trying to release Guidle tours as and when I can. If you're not familiar with Guidle, it's an audio tours app, and I do have a good dozen or so places covered if you want to check that out as well. All of the information to all of the places that I post is on my website, normaexplores.com. So with that all being said, let's get on with episode 1. This week we visit the Suffolk village of Peasenhall, where we find ourselves at the grave of Rose Harsant, a simple grey cross stone that was once white but has weathered and is now dressed in lichen. It feels a little lonely out here. The cemetery sits on the outskirts of the village, and although many graves bear freshly laid flowers, I imagine Rose out here alone, looking towards the heart of the village where her name was so well known for a time. Nevertheless, this is where Rose was laid to rest 122 years ago. The year is 1902. A storm has raged all night, and it's early morning on the 1st of June. William Harsant arrives at Providence House by way of a back door from the garden. He had been intending to deliver some linen to his daughter Rose, who was a domestic servant at the house. Instead, he steps into the kitchen to find the body of Rose at the bottom of the stairs to her attic room. Her throat had been cut, and charring made it seem like someone had tried to set fire to her nightdress. A broken bottle of paraffin attested to this. The alarm was raised, and so began the first moments of one of this county's most enduring mysteries. Despite this horrific scene, the initial assumption was that Rose had somehow committed suicide. Upon examination of her body, however, it was determined to be an act of murder. It was also found that she was some 6 months into pregnancy. Notes were found among her possessions, including one to indicate that she had been planning to meet someone that night. It read, "Dear Rose, I will try to see you tonight at 12 o'clock at your place. If you put a light in your window at 10 o'clock for about 10 minutes, then you can take it out again. Don't have a light in your room at 12 o'clock, as I will come round the back with the light." The first and most likely suspect was William Gardiner. He was a prominent member of the local community, though not necessarily free from scandal or universally popular. He was foreman at the local seed drill works, which was only a short distance away from Providence House, as was the home he shared with his wife and 6 children. He was also choirmaster at the primitive Methodist chapel where Rose was sometimes given the task of cleaning. A year previously, a scandal had broken out when two men started a rumour that they had heard intimate conversations between Rose and William while in the chapel. William, who was many years her senior, had at that time been outraged at the audacity of the accusation. He threatened to sue those making the accusations, and a primitive Methodist church investigation ensued, which resulted in the matter being dropped, if not forgotten. When it was found that Rose had been murdered while pregnant, suspicion quickly fell on William and he was arrested. There was circumstantial evidence aplenty and witnesses that claimed to have seen him outside Rose's house on the evening before the crime, perhaps waiting and watching a certain window in Providence House. The handwriting on Rose's notes were determined to be in William's hand, and the envelope matched ones that he used at the Seadrill Works. A broken medicine bottle by her body was labelled with instructions for Mrs. Gardiner's children. All of this certainly tied Gardiner to the scene, but no one could place him in the house at the time of the crime. He went to trial in November of 1902, and all the evidence and witnesses were presented. Mrs. Gardiner stated that her husband had not left the house that night, and it had actually been herself who had passed the medicine bottle to Rose some weeks earlier. The trial brought forward a neighbour of Rose's called Frederick Davis. William's defence implied that he had been close to Rose, and while he admitted that he had also written her somewhat inappropriate letters, he claimed he could not have been the father of Rose's child. He had, he confessed, supplied her with risque poetry on her request and sourced a booklet on techniques to end a pregnancy, but he only did these things in hope of winning her favour. Frederick claimed that she never did reciprocate his feelings. While there seems to be a lot of evidence pointing to William being guilty, the jury could not agree on a verdict. It afterwards emerged that it had been an 11-1 stalemate in favour of a guilty verdict. Prior to 1974, all jurors needed to agree on the verdict. However, today, a majority of 10 out of 12 votes is enough to secure a verdict. Gardiner's second trial then commenced in January of 1903. Much of the evidence was the same as the first trial, with a few minor changes to witness statements, notably from Rose's own brother. He had initially denied delivering the letters between the two, but now admitted that he had done so. The defence at the second trial relied much more on sentimentality, and there was much more emphasis on Mrs. Gardiner and her situation in defending her husband. William Gardiner's standing in the church community was again highlighted, and ultimately there still was no evidence placing him at the scene during the hours of murder. So once again the jury retired, and once again they could not agree on a verdict. This time, however, the majority were for acquittal. It was decided that a third trial would be equally ineffective, and no one had the will to pursue it further. William Gardiner remains one of few people to have sat through two trials with no verdict ever being returned. William was released on the 29th of January 1903, having spent almost 240 days in custody. To avoid a public outcry, the news of his release day was never announced, and so he slipped quietly out of prison and on to London. His family would join him there, and they never returned to Peasenhall. He died, never formally acquitted of Rose's murder, in 1941. To this day, no one has ever been convicted of Rose's murder, and it remains, officially at least, unsolved. There have, over the years, been other theories put forward, most notably that Mrs. Gardiner could have killed her out of jealousy, or that her mischievous neighbour Frederick had some role in the crime. But I think the most reasonable assumption is that which was made at the time. William, knowing the child was his and what further scandal would undoubtedly come out of its birth, killed Rose and relied on his status in the village to protect him. Whether he went with the intention of killing her that night, or whether he lost control of his temper when she told him her attempt at abortion had failed, we will never know. I suspect had he been a labourer or tradesman and not someone respected in the church community, his first trial would have gone very differently. As for Rose, let's remember her as a lively young woman with an inquiring mind. Perhaps she enjoyed the excitement of being alone around someone like William, clearly a man wielding some confidence and local respect in his community. Perhaps she was just incredibly naive and thought he would choose her over his wife. We will never know what conversations were had between them or what promises were made by either party. Rarely do we get to truthfully start a tale with "it was a dark and stormy night," but here we could. On this stormy summer night, 2 lives were taken for, let's not forget, her unborn child, as we stand in front of Rose's grave in Peasenhall Cemetery. The inscription upon it reads, "In affectionate remembrance of Rose Annie Harsent, whose life was cruelly taken on the 1st of June 1902 in her 23rd year. A light is from our household gone, a voice we loved is stilled, a place is vacant in our home that can never be filled." If you wish to visit the grave of Rose and her unborn baby, the What 3 Words location is roughly Unearthly Trails Gliders. There have been lots of books written about her case, and we have listed the sources used in telling of this story on our website at normaexplores.com. Providence House is now called Stewart House, and it sits on the corner opposite Emmett's store in the village. Emmett's has been trading since 1820 and would have been here in operation at the time of the crime. If you walk from Providence House up along Church Street, you will shortly come to a new housing development around a street called Smith Close. You may notice a blue plaque on the wall by the road. It reminds us that this was once the site of the seed drill works, and in our story it is where William was employed as foreman. William and his family lived in Ulmer Cottage, a small terrace on the street, located roughly at Encode's Suffolk Glare. I would remind anyone that these are private dwellings, so if you do find yourself in the village and want to see these places, please be respectful of the residents. A curious twist occurred in the tale 2 years later when papers were awash with reports of a confession. Many papers picked up on the story, and it was widely reported that an artilleryman named Taylor, currently imprisoned in Dover Military Prison, had made a voluntary confession. He stated that he had committed the crime and that it had been weighing on him ever since. He was imprisoned for enlisting with fraudulent papers, though this wasn't his first stint in the lockup. He had enlisted in the Peasenhall area in 1903 and as such would have been very familiar with the events of the previous year. The Coventry Evening Telegraph reported on the 15th of August 1904 that a Daily Chronicle representative interviewed Mrs. Gardner, the wife of the man who was twice tried on the charge of murdering Rose Harsent at Peasenhall and who was then released. Mrs. Gardner has since conducted a confectionery business at Southall, where her husband works at his trade as a carpenter. When she heard of the reported confession at Dover, Mrs. Gardner exclaimed, "What it means to us, should this turn out to be the truth." She continued, "Our name cleared, and more than that, the names of our 5 poor children." She added, "I am afraid I can't let you see Mr. Gardner. He is very far from well, and the doctors were very strict in his instructions not to let him be excited. This news coming so suddenly is very exciting for him." Ultimately, however, the press representative was granted a few minutes interview. "There really seems to be some hope that this is the truth in the report," said Mr. Gardner. "It seems too good to be true, and I have prayed that the truth may be brought to light. I've always felt it would, but the suspense has been dreadful." Nothing else came of this confession. 2 policemen came down from Suffolk and interviewed him, but left feeling he was just repeating information he had seen in the news and didn't really have any unique insight into the crime itself. The governor of the military prison said he suspected it was a ruse because he wanted to get out of his commitment to the military. Personally, I think there are better ways of getting out of the military than confessing to a brutal murder, but we really don't know much about this individual. I would have liked to learn more about this chap, but unfortunately very little useful information was shared in the press at the time. He wasn't seriously considered as a suspect, but still part of me wants to really know what happened to him. Of the other people that feature in this story, I sometimes wonder about the 2 men that initiated the rumours of having heard inappropriate conversations between Rose and William. William Wright was a wheelwright and Alfonso Skinner was a whitesmith. They both worked for the Seadrill Works and actually shared a residence. Alfonso Skinner was a boarder at the White household, and it's easy to imagine how these 2 could while away their evenings over a beer, contriving trouble for a foreman that they didn't like. At 21 and 25 respectively, they were possibly bored, being unwed, and who knows, perhaps one or other of them had had their own advances towards Rose rejected. It's speculation, as much was in this case, but people can be very petty in such circumstances. Alfonso would go on to marry the following year, eventually passing away in 1960 at the age of 86. William, on the other hand, seems to have died just 2 years later in 1904, although I can find little information as to the circumstances. Still, at just 23 years old, it's a sadly very young age to go. Rose's infatuated young neighbour Frederick was 19 at the time. He and Rose are both shown in the 1901 census, with Rose at Providence House, which was listed on the street, and Frederick's family living at the first house listed on Rendham Road. Today, Rendham Road is what Church Street turns into once you get past the site of the old seed works. Frederick is listed as a draper's assistant on the census and was described as a shop assistant in newspapers at the time. The letters he wrote to Rose were so explicit that they could not be read in court, but copies were provided to the jury for perusal. I do wonder how they would hold up against the average dating app message inbox today. But at the time, they were quite a scandalous set of notes, and the papers seemed to delight in this part of Rose's character. The fact that Rose had kept the notes and not destroyed them presumably meant that she was a willing recipient, as Frederick had implied. I don't know what happened to Frederick after the trial. I hope he was able to put the scandal and the trial behind him, unless, of course, he had been involved in the crime. We will never know the full facts of that night, and it remains one of Suffolk's great mysteries. I hope you have enjoyed this graveyard tale. It is a re-recording of one that I have previously released, which has now been removed. It was part of my previous podcast series that I released through Patreon. So we're starting again, and I wanted to still include this in my list of episodes because it's such a fascinating case, and there is an awful lot more information out there if it's piqued your interest and you want to delve deeper into it. Thank you for joining me on this first episode of Epitaph East Anglia. Join us on social media, either under our main Norma Explores username or under Epitaph East Anglia on Instagram and Threads. We are on Blue Sky under Norma Explores. We don't tend to do much more social mediaing these days than we have to, so they are our main outlets now. And as I say, you can find lots more information about what we've been doing on our website at normaexplores.com. Thank you for listening, and we will see you again.